Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality podcast, is brought to you by eMenu Choice Point of Sale and ClarkPro. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. My goal for this podcast: educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By bringing the resident and customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Joining me today on Tips from Trestle is Seth Winder. Seth is a training specialist with ClarkPro. Born in the Philippines and raised in rural Pennsylvania, his life experiences have shaped his identity and helped him to appreciate the individuality of all people. Seth spent the first 8 years of his career in public education and then transitioned the last couple of years into ClarkPro. His mission in life is to serve as a bridge for people. Wherever they are starting from, he strives to get them to where they're going. Seth, thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Aaron, thank you so much for the time. I'm really looking forward to talking. DISC and EQ and culture just are so near and dear to me.
Yeah, I was very excited too. I know when we were talking about setting this up, this is a topic that assessing people and doing, how do we coach and build teams? It's so important in senior living and in food service. And so I know this is super beneficial for our listeners. But let's start with kind of give us a little bit about your background. You get an education, and then you moved into the corporate side and training and development. So give us kind of a quick rundown of how you got where you're at.
Yeah, I love that question because I really am just kind of a summation of all my part. So backing all the way up, I was adopted from the Philippines when I was 9 months old, grew up in rural PA, and growing up in that type of a community and moving here in Lancaster, you experience a lot of different people. You experience it firsthand living in a home, at college, in the workplace. And through all those experiences, I realized how important and how valuable individuals are. And I put that into practice as a teacher for 8 years. I taught second grade, and that was wonderful. Like, teachers are there fighting a good fight, but that helped me just have a deeper appreciation for where everybody's coming from and giving everybody that same opportunity. In 2 years ago, I shifted gears and moved over here to ClarkPro. That chapter of my life has changed. I have 3 little boys of my own, so kids at school and kids at home. The home front, it's a lot to manage. So it's great to work with adults, and I've been very people oriented. So this role of training specialist has been wonderful for me because I get to connect people who are starting for the very first time from all walks of life, whether it's our earlier on in my career here was at the warehouses, our new hires now with Pro. It's wonderful to connect people and see that change in their professional life and even in some of their personal lives too.
Yeah. Team building in training and development, I think, is something that is invaluable. And I know that in senior living, especially, there's a huge opportunity for that. And so think about the way I've coached and trained and developed. There's always got to be a starting point, right? And I think that how do you assess somebody? How do you better understand somebody? There's a number of tools out there, but your background and your guys' experience at ClarkPro is with using the DISC assessment. And so
Yes.
I'd love for you to kind of quickly define what is the DISC assessment, what does EQ stand for, and complement each other in team building and developing culture.
Yes. So the DISC assessment, the personal and professional development tool, it helps us essentially just work better together and understand ourselves and our own priorities and working tendencies, and then understanding those things in other people that we work with as well. And then the most practical, applicable piece of this is, what do we do with it then? I can understand that somebody has a faster pace or would like to dot their I's and cross their T's and not do things on the fly. But how do I put that into practice? And that's where the emotional intelligence comes into play. recognizing things such as our own self-awareness. These are the four skill areas of it: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And all those things work in tandem with the four DISC styles: D for dominance, I for influence, S for steadiness, and C for conscientiousness. So the
Yep.
more you understand those styles and preferences of people, the more you can tailor that delivery to speak to their needs and better connect with them.
So I know that you at Clark Pro have been really using those two together to kind of do your own internal training, support customers with it.
Mm.
So what are some of the key benefits you found of using this profile when you talk about some of the dynamics of a team and communication?
Yeah, so I have to kind of back up again there. Like, when do we introduce this? We start introducing it to our new hires during their onboarding period. We have them take that assessment, and
Yeah.
we really do start with them. What are my own styles and tendencies? And then starting to turn it outwards of, well, what about my team around me? Well, I know that Seth is a high I. He's very talkative, very chatty. Whereas on the other side of this, Becky, who some of you may be familiar with, she's more of that high D. She's very results oriented.
Yeah.
And knowing those things about people are really helpful as you start to work with them. And you see, like, when I'm going into a meeting with somebody for the first time, I want to be mindful of those things because I want to give them what they need. We talk about using the platinum, there's the golden rule, which treat
Mhm.
others you want to be treated. But here with Clark Pro, we talk about the platinum rule: treat others the way they would like to be treated. And
Yeah.
when comes awareness of what do they prioritize? What do they value? What do they want to know? And then for me to be able to say, well, how can I change my delivery? How do I speak to those things? So by doing those things and speaking, quote unquote, their language, it gains traction with them. They feel as though you took the time to respect them, the things that they're interested in, not just about you and your priorities, but knowing that if you meet in the middle somewhere, you guys can go further together.
I love the fact that you just called out the platinum rule.
Mm,
I do not hear it talked about very much in
mm,
anything, but for me and what I do with supporting customers and clients, I talk about the platinum rule all the time.
mm.
That's from a service perspective, we're going to be successful taking care of seniors. But like you're saying, from that training and development piece, knowing what makes somebody tick and being able to talk to them about it and treat them that way is
Mm.
so invaluable. And I love the fact that you called that out. For me,
Yeah.
it's near and dear.
Yes, and I think it's impactful internally and externally for the teams that we work with. Know how people tick. What is their pace? Are people more fast paced or more steady, methodical? And what's their response to information? Some people can operate on very little information, and that's
Yeah.
fine. Some people want 1A, 1B, 1C. People want 2A, 2B, 2C, right? And that can also be turned outwardly too. When we have our new hires go through their onboarding, we have a session called Competing Two. So we talk about our competitors and competing one, but then in competing two, that's where the emotional intelligence piece comes in. How do you navigate conversations to pick up on the subtleties, things that they might not be saying or putting down, and then again tailoring your delivery to address that. So we focus on it internally and then externally as well.
Yeah. Makes so much sense. And so, I've done a disc assessment. This was as I was getting ready to start my business. I got some coaching from a business coach. And one of the first things they had me do was a disc assessment. And it's
Mm,
a massive report, right?
mm,
But one of the things when I started looking through all that is like, there's a lot of information here. And so that was kind of one of my first misconceptions was there's
mm,
a deal with here. So thinking about that, well, what are, in addition to how big it can be, how are some
mm.
common misconceptions that people might have about disc assessments? And what do you guys do to address those misconceptions?
Yeah. In my first role here with the company, I would deliver training to all the new employees from the distribution center level all the way up to VP senior leadership throughout the company. And I've heard all things like, well, this is like a horoscope, or this is like, it's not founded in any science, which actually very untrue. The
Yeah.
reason behind it is like 100 years old, if not more now. So some of the misconceptions are they're questioning the validity of. So,
Right.
what can you glean from a paper assessment that might only be asking 28 questions? That's fair. But we also want to recognize that this is a you assessment. You are the one putting the responses into that algorithm, and the feedback that you get out of it is should be an accurate reflection of you. Um, and some of the things that I've heard as well is like, well, I don't really agree with what it said, uh,
Yeah.
and I don't really like the way that it called me out or said that like I was belligerent or under pressure I might become like manipulative. And what I've done in the training role is try to reframe that and use that more proactively. So for myself as a high DI, those were some of my things that under pressure may become belligerent or manipulative. And so I have to humble myself and say to people, well, even though I don't like want to recognize that in myself, or maybe if I don't recognize that in myself, how can I use that proactively? So I don't want to come off that way. It is not the way that I want to interact and the impression I want to leave. So I take more of a concerted effort to not show up that way. So when people mention the thing they disagree with, I love when they call that out because it's also that reframing opportunity.
It's funny you bring that up because there were definitely parts of my disc assessment where I was like, that doesn't really feel like how I operate. But one of the things, and I'm very much a geek when it comes to these assessments. Like I've done like Myers-Briggs and predictive index, and forget the one where they tell you what kind of bird you are. There's a bunch of them out there. And so one of the things that I've noticed when I do those is that the more truthful and honest about answering the questions I can be, I get some of those results that maybe I don't like. But the more I
Mm.
really reflect, I'm like, yeah, you know what? That's probably more accurate than I want it to be. Though there's opportunity there. And so as we think about that, I'm curious, do you have any success stories where using a disc or maybe pushing back, like you were talking about, really helped the team come together and be successful with the good and the bad, if you will, from what they see in
Mm.
the assessment and really come together?
Technology continues to drive changes in senior care, and that includes food service. eMenu Choice is an award-winning point-of-service application for managing the dining function in senior living communities. This mobile, touchscreen-enabled software enhances the dining experience for residents while streamlining processes for staff. The flexibility and functionality of eMenu Choice makes it an effective solution for any type of senior living environment, from independent and assisted living to skilled nursing facilities. It works for production kitchens or restaurant-style service with options for per meal or a la carte pricing and accommodates a variety of payments, including bill to account, meal credits, and credit cards. Created by a senior care provider with more than a century of experience serving older adults, eMenu Choice eliminates communication barriers between staff and residents while enabling person-centered choices and greater resident satisfaction. eMenu Choice, transforming dining for senior living.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two that come to mind. One specifically was for me when I started with the company. An underlying thing and theme here is radical candor and radical candor, caring personally, challenging directly. That needed to be delivered to me because I fell into some of those pitfalls and some of those challenges and limitations of a high DI. I was very fast moving. I didn't ask the questions I needed to. I I was kind of in my own lane, my way or the highway. And what it did for me when my one coworker called me out on it, helped me step back and really humble myself again to say, wow, like I am not contributing. I am just very me right now. But what I appreciated even more about that was that she took into consideration my disc tendencies and knowing that I am results oriented as a person who leads with high D. And I also am out here trying to connect and relate to people. So with those two things, it made me kind of passive. It made me just like, oh yeah, sure, I got this, but I really didn't. I wanted
Yeah.
to put forth a result, but she delivered that candid conversation with me and helped me address that head on. I really appreciated that from my former coworker. And I also had the opportunity to do it with one of my current team members here within ClarkPro. And long story short, there was a message that was sent and it was automatically deleted because it wasn't meant to be sent to me. And looking back on the experience that I had from my former coworker, I was able to put that into practice myself and say, like, okay, what is this person's priorities? What is their style? What do they want to accomplish in a day? And why would they say that? And that's where the emotional intelligence comes in too. The social awareness. What's going on for them? Why did they send that message? But it really starts with like giving yourself that pause to give your brain a fighting chance to
Yeah.
think through like what is the positive productive outcome that I need here. And in that session, in that conversation, I was able to ask, hey, like, what's going on? This is the way it was received by me. I'd love to just hear uh, why you're feeling that way. And I was able to do that because I had experience with it on the receiving end, but also because I knew what her priorities were. And I genuinely care about the success of her and for our team. So knowing that candor was really helpful for all of us.
Yeah. One of the things we've talked a lot about DISC, but we really haven't gotten into the emotional intelligence. And I know, like, from myself, being in food service, it's a fast-paced environment, especially
Yep.
during it's the communication can be very direct. Feelings can get hurt really fast because and one of the things that I've had to evolve, and I know I'm still working on, is thinking about how I need to be more emotionally intelligent, be more connected, that piece of it. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how someone in food service who maybe doesn't think that way, or this is a new concept, how emotional
Mm.
intelligence can be really valuable in just overall performance and developing your team.
Yeah, I love that lens because the research indicates that 90% of high achieving or top performers have high EQ, high emotional intelligence. And it actually impacts approximately 58% of our day-to-day job functions, responsibilities, in terms of time management, in terms of relationship management, presentation skills, dealing with stress, all of these things. It impacts that. So when I think about where do we want to start with people, self-awareness is the biggest thing here. We need to start with ourselves, just like with DISC, starting with yourself and moving outward. And some things that come along with that and some practical things are like naming your emotions accurately. Like, am I mad or am I frustrated? Or am
Yeah.
I mad or am I livid? Or am I mad or just disappointed? Like, there are different levels to that, and the way that we show up in those should not all be the same because all those emotions are nuanced. So recognizing and being able to specify what are our emotions. And a big piece of this is naming triggers. So in that fast-paced environment in which you're talking about, I've only had a little bit of time in food service, but I have mad big respect for everybody that does on that front line. Uh, we all appreciate you. But it is very fast paced, like I said. So to put this into play, there's a lot of triggers going on. There might be loud voices, there's clanking, there's where your customers at the end of the day are the people waiting at the table that are hungry. And we don't want to be behind for them. Well,
Yeah.
even that is social awareness. But if you're triggered, coming back to self awareness, like if your line chef or your manager is yelling, like, Aaron, why'd you forget that? And immediately that might throw you off your groove. So recognizing that even yelling or loud noises, or when there's more tickets up there than one would expect, those can be triggers. So once we can identify those triggers, the better suited we'll be to actually do something about it. So practically just like being able to name those emotions accurately and recognizing and identifying those triggers.
I know one of the things that I've been able to do, I think that makes those kinds of tense moments better is front loading those conversations.
Mm,
Like
mhm.
I will tell anytime I'm in charge of like expediting or running a meal service, I'll just tell the team, hey, I'm going to be short. I'm going to bark out orders. It's not a mad or disrespectful thing. It's literally like, this is the communication style that we have to have. And I found that truly nobody has ever offended because it's like, hey, yes, chef, we
Yeah.
need this. And it's not, we just can't have a 30-minute conversation.
Right, right. Yeah, but I
So,
think you hit the nail on the head, like setting that expectation right out of the gate. But even before, like, you guys are on the floor for that day, when we're hiring, I think a real key component of this is hiring well and hiring ideal team players, people that are
yeah,
humble, hungry, and smart, and are able to work collaboratively on a team and know what they're getting into, right? So then none of that is a surprise to them and less likely to be a trigger if there's already anticipation around that.
it makes total sense. So, as we're kind of wrapping up here, Seth, I would love for you kind of put on your like futurist hat, if you will, and think about how do you see either what ClarkPro is doing or how other organizations can use emotional intelligence and assessments like DISC to improve their workplace, especially thinking about hybrid work environments, remote environments, just kind of the evolving nature of the workplace that we're working in.
That is such a challenge, and ever since COVID really hit, that's been top of mind for everybody. But something that I'm proud of here with Clark Pro is the way that we've been able to unite our team. 25% of our team currently is remote, and you could probably ask all 25% of them, uh, like, how do you feel about the culture? And they would all say, it's so strong, it's so people oriented, the support is right there. But when I think about the future about of emotional intelligence, DISC in the workplace, and that whole culture, I think something that needs to be prioritized is not just growing people in their technical operational skills. Yes, that's essential. You need to know how to do like all the specific things that, again, I'm not from this industry. Teaching education is my habit. So again, respect to all of you. But um prioritizing, so growing people in social ways. And right at the onset, looking at DISC as part of kind of their onboarding period. What are my tendencies? When in the kitchen, how am I going to show up? And looking at emotional intelligence right at the onset. And that is really hard to implement from nothing. But in terms of like those of who are decision makers, start with yourself. Start in a small group. Take the DISC assessment yourself. Have those conversations. And even if it ends up being just a 30-minute conversation, it's better than zero. And it's a starting point. And some things that other practical examples, when we have new people starting with our Clark Pro team, we do a virtual lunch meet and greet. And it sounds so simple, but on day one, everybody brings their lunch in. We have them up on a screen, name, role, time of the company, what's your bacon preference? 10 for crispy, 0 for keeping it light. Again, very high eye, very personal, fun, loving. And then things like bringing our remote people in office for within their first 30 days. So they get immersed in that culture and they get to see our pace. They get to ask those questions live in person. We looked at the ROI of that and it still continues to just exceed our expectation. And it really is like helping them stay committed to us even longer for retention. And they appreciate that. And just two more things, like in office week, we do that twice a year, bringing our whole team on the campus and again, connecting all of us instead of just the new hires. And then even the day-to-day things we do on our calendars, we have a daily reset, which is a 15-minute walk. And the studies show behind that, besides like the health benefits, but in terms of sales as well, to be able to maintain a conversation for 2 to 3 minutes, that's intentional play. Walking is putting you in a space to have those conversations, maintain conversations. And even what does that look like on the kitchen floor? Well, before your shift starts, like, hey, let's just be brief. Let's just talk for a little bit. Have those, not necessarily like family relationships, there's a line there, but being friends with people and having trust and being able to maintain those conversations. So I've said a lot, but again, my big takeaway is prioritize this social aspect of your job and grow people socially. And when you do that, DISC and EQ are going to naturally be a piece of that social component.
I love all those examples. And I think there's definitely opportunities for listeners and their operations to find a good starting point with any of. So, well, Seth, this has been a great conversation. I could probably go another hour on it, but no, but if listeners want to learn more, if they want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Seth Winder, and you'll find my tag, teacher turned trainer. That's kind of my slogan, but also swinder@clarkpro.com. We're establishing ourselves as a powerful, small and mighty brand, and would love to connect with you all.
Perfect. Well, Seth, again, thanks for joining me today and this great conversation around DISC and EQ. And so I appreciate you being with me on Tips from Trestle.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
So there it is, everybody. Another one in the books. Thanks again for tuning in. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestle. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.